They smiled and said, "Thanks for the wedding present." My parents, who had secretly sold the only thing my grandfather ever left me, my lake house. A home filled with my childhood memories. Summers spent fishing, learning to fix things, and watching the sun set over the lake. It wasn't just a house. It was the only time in my life I ever felt seen. And they sold it. For her, my sister's wedding cost $150,000. Custom flowers, a dress flown in from France, an orchestra, champagne fountains, fireworks. And when I stood there watching them bask in praise for their generosity, they raised their glasses to me and laughed. "Thanks for the gift." They thought I didn't know, that I was too polite, too passive, too forgiving. But what they didn't know was that I had already seen the forged documents, that I had spoken to the buyers, that I had a lawyer, and that at the very moment they were giving toasts in that ballroom, they were just hours away from losing everything they thought they'd gotten away with. I smiled, I waited, and then I told them, "You should check your mail." What they found changed everything. This isn't just a story about betrayal. It's about how I took back what was mine. Legally, financially, and emotionally. So stay with me, because by the end of this story, you'll see why sometimes the best revenge is the one they never see coming until it's too late. Claire Emerson is a 6-year-old architect living in Boston. She's known for her quiet determination, elegant designs, and an ability to see structure where others see chaos. She lives alone by choice, having built a peaceful life focused on her work. But behind her calm exterior is a woman shaped by long summers at a lakeside cabin. Summers that taught her the value of silence, resilience, and a bond that once meant everything. Every summer of her childhood, Claire Emerson had packed a small suitcase and boarded a train heading north, toward Lake Wyman and the weathered cabin that her grandfather, Jack Whitaker, had built with his own hands. Those 3 months were sacred, a stark contrast to the noise and neglect of her life back in the city. While other kids went to camp or watched cartoons indoors, Claire spent her days learning how to sand wood, fish with patience, and listen to the stillness that settled over the lake just before dusk. Jack wasn't just her grandfather. He was her teacher, her protector, and in many ways, her sanctuary. A retired carpenter who had spent most of his life working with his hands, Jack valued things that lasted. Oak beams, iron hinges, and promises. He called the lake house Harbor's Rest, and to Claire it became exactly that. Every floorboard and creak of the dock held a memory. Every summer was marked by small but meaningful rituals: morning coffee on the porch with 2 mugs steaming side by side, fishing rods at dawn, and the smell of pine mixed with sawdust as Jack tinkered with repairs he never truly finished. Claire had a sister, Heather, younger by 5 years. Heather visited the cabin too, but never stayed long. Where Claire saw peace, Heather saw boredom. She was always in a hurry back to her friends, her phone, her comforts. Heather was beautiful, lively, and quick to demand attention, while Claire often faded into the background, preferring books to brunches, hiking boots to high heels. Their parents, Elizabeth and Thomas, were always more tuned in to Heather's frequency. They praised her charm and gave her whatever she wanted, while Claire was expected to figure things out on her own. It wasn't resentment Claire felt, not exactly. It was a quiet understanding that she would never be the center of anyone's world the way Heather was. Except with Jack. It was Jack who noticed when Claire stopped speaking for a time in the 5th grade, crushed by something her teacher had said. It was Jack who gave her her first set of drafting pencils when she showed interest in buildings and spaces. And it was Jack who made her feel, in those summers at Harbor's Rest, like she was exactly where she was meant to be. When Claire turned 16, Jack let her steer the boat across the lake alone. When she was 22 and just out of college, he taught her how to winterize the cabin properly. And when she got her first job at an architecture firm, it was Jack who sent her a handwritten letter 3 pages long telling her how proud he was. Then, 6 years ago, Jack passed away. His death wasn't sudden, but it was devastating. He had left a will, and everyone assumed the lake house would be divided or sold. But when the lawyer read his instructions, there was a pause in the room. To my granddaughter Claire, who understands the value of solitude and the meaning of a quiet life, I leave Harbor's Rest and all that it holds. There had been a silence that followed, thick, uncomfortable. Claire remembered her mother's smile, thin and tight-lipped. Well, you were always his favorite, Elizabeth had said, the words sweet but sharp. Her father, Thomas, had looked away, and Heather had crossed her arms, clearly annoyed. But Claire hadn't heard them. All she could think was that somehow, even in death, Jack had seen her. He had understood what the lake house meant. It wasn't just property. It was memory. It was home. The years that followed were busy ones. Claire poured herself into her firm, into designs that echoed the balance and simplicity she had learned from Jack. But every few months, she'd escape to Harbor's Rest. She would clean the gutters, fix the roof, walk the trails Jack once hiked. It remained her sanctuary, untouched by time, until one summer she discovered someone had been there without her knowing. A light left on, a door not fully closed, a photo frame moved. And with that, the silence began to shift. Something was wrong. And just like that, her world, carefully built and held together by memories, was about to be shaken to its core. Claire sat quietly in the polished, oak-paneled office of her grandfather's longtime attorney, Mr. Hollingsworth, her hands folded neatly in her lap. The sun filtered through the lace curtains, casting dappled light across the large wooden table where her parents, David and Marianne Emerson, sat stiffly beside her younger sister Heather. It had been 3 months since Jack Emerson passed away, and this was the day his last wishes would finally be read aloud. Claire had tried to brace herself for anything, but she hadn't expected the reading of the will to turn into a powder keg of family tension. Mr. Hollingsworth adjusted his glasses and began. He listed a few modest bequests to old friends and charities, and then came the moment that shifted everything. To my beloved granddaughter, Claire Emerson, he read slowly, who has always honored the value of solitude, craftsmanship, and the peace of the lake, who, like me, understands that some places are sacred. I leave the lake house, with all its contents, solely and fully. The room went dead silent. Claire's breath caught, her heart pounding not from greed, but from the overwhelming weight of what that house meant to her. It was their summers, her childhood, her bond with her grandfather wrapped into wood and stone. She felt a quiet, aching gratitude. But that gratitude dissolved quickly when she saw the expressions on the faces around her. Marianne's lips curled into a thin smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Well, of course he left it to Claire, she said with a brittle tone. He always favored her. Jack could never hide that. David shifted uncomfortably beside her. That house should have been split between the girls. That would have been fair. Not just handed over like some prize. Claire opened her mouth to speak, but Heather cut in first. You're telling me he gave her the whole thing? Heather's voice was sharp, edged with disbelief and rising anger. Just Claire? Not even a share? I spent summers there too, you know. I have memories. I was part of that place. Claire kept her voice even. Heather, I know it means something to you too. I never asked for it. I didn't know he planned this, but maybe we can still go up together sometime, if you'd like. Heather scoffed and looked away. David leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. That place is worth a small fortune now. He always had a soft spot for you. This just proves it. Claire glanced at Mr. Hollingsworth, who, to his credit, looked slightly embarrassed. Your grandfather was very clear, he said. He left this house to Claire alone. He updated the will just last year. I have it in writing and video. The drive back to Boston that evening was silent. Claire sat in the back seat while her parents whispered up front, Heather staring moodily out the window. The air between them had changed, weighted with unspoken resentment. Once home, Claire walked into her small apartment, kicked off her shoes, and sat at the edge of her bed. She pulled out the old journal her grandfather had given her when she turned 16. On the inside cover was a note in his careful handwriting. If ever the world turns its back on you, come home to the lake. It'll still be there. I built it for peace, and I hope you find yours there too. That line echoed in her mind now like a prophecy. He must have known. Somehow he had sensed that there would come a time when Claire needed something that couldn't be taken from her, something unshakable, a sanctuary. But instead of peace, the inheritance had created a fault line in the family. Claire could feel it widening beneath her feet already. Heather's resentment was like a slow burn, masked behind civility but simmering with each exchanged glance. And her parents, rather than hiding their disappointment, began to treat her differently in small but perceptible ways, less warmth in their voices, fewer invitations to family dinners, passive-aggressive remarks about lucky daughters and favorite children. Claire didn't regret inheriting the lake house, but she also hadn't expected it to cost her so much, so quickly. What had once been her safe place now loomed in her mind as both a gift and a burden. Still, she held on to Jack's words. If the world turned its back, come home. Little did she know, then those words would soon be tested in a way she could never have imagined. Claire returned to Boston that night with a strange heaviness she couldn't shake. Though she had always known that the lake house was special to her in ways her family might never understand, the reading of the will had exposed a far deeper rift. But for now, she buried those emotions under work deadlines and architectural blueprints her way of coping. Life, at least on the surface, moved forward. A few weeks later, the family gathered again, this time for celebratory news. Heather had just gotten engaged to Tyler Morgan, the son of George Morgan, a prominent businessman in upstate New York. Tyler was tall, well-dressed, and polite in the obligatory way of people who'd grown up in old money. He worked at his father's financial consulting firm and drove a car that cost more than Claire's annual office rent. Claire had met him briefly at Thanksgiving and remembered him mostly for his charming smile and zero interest in anyone else's conversation. Still, Heather was positively glowing. He proposed in Paris, Heather announced over brunch at their parents' house, her diamond ring catching the light as she gestured animatedly. On a rooftop at sunset with a view of the Eiffel Tower. Their mother gasped as though she hadn't already heard the story 10 times. Their father beamed with pride. Claire smiled politely. The wedding plans began immediately. Heather envisioned a ceremony that would rival royal affairs. A destination wedding at an exclusive oceanside resort in Rhode Island was booked within 2 weeks. The venue came with a private chapel, a vineyard, and an estate that could accommodate 200 guests. She had her dress custom, designed in Paris. A full 10-piece orchestra was hired for both the ceremony and the reception. Tyler insisted on drone footage of the entire day, including a dramatic flyover of the vows, which Heather thought would be absolutely cinematic. Claire sat through the family dinners and planning sessions like a distant observer. She wasn't envious this world had never appealed to her, but she felt increasingly alienated by the extravagance. Heather treated the wedding like a full-time job and an identity. Every conversation began with florals, moved on to guest lists, and ended with arguments about colors for the lighting design. One evening, Claire invited Heather to dinner, hoping for a quiet moment to connect. Over grilled salmon and a glass of wine, she finally broached the topic. "I know this wedding must be expensive," she began gently. "I can't do much, but I'd be happy to contribute something, maybe $5,000 to help with the flowers or the photographer." Heather blinked, stunned, then let out a small laugh that didn't reach her eyes. "Claire, that's sweet of you, but we have it covered. Tyler's parents are helping, and so are Mom and Dad. We don't need your donation." Claire sat back in her chair, trying to ignore the sting in Heather's tone. "It wasn't a donation. I just thought I could help." "You don't have to," Heather said, brushing it off as she flagged the waiter. "Honestly, it's already taken care of. We've got everything planned." Still, something about the way Heather said it didn't sit right. "You're sure everything's within budget?" Claire asked. Heather waved her off. "Totally. Dad said not to worry. They've got a financial plan." The words financial plan echoed in Claire's mind long after that dinner. Her parents had never been known for their careful budgeting. Growing up, she'd watched them bend over backward for Heather's ballet lessons, her broken phones, her fashion whims, all while Claire was told to work a summer job if she wanted art supplies or a class trip. The mention of a plan sent a quiet alarm ringing in the back of her mind. Later that week, she called her mother just to check in, and subtly to ask how the wedding expenses were being handled. Her mother responded with vague reassurances. "Oh, we've got it figured out, honey. You just focus on your work. You don't need to worry about us." "I just don't want you to put yourselves under too much strain," Claire said. "Don't be silly," her mother replied. "This is what parents do. We want the best for Heather." Claire hung up feeling dismissed but also unconvinced. Something didn't feel right. The venue alone likely cost upwards of $40,000. Add in the dress, catering, musicians, photographers, and a 3-week honeymoon in Tuscany, and the numbers stopped adding up. Despite herself, Claire pushed the worry aside. Maybe Tyler's family truly was contributing. Maybe her parents had some savings she didn't know about. And perhaps, she told herself, it wasn't her place to interfere. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. And in time, it would grow into something she could no longer ignore. For now, though, the wedding machine pressed on, dazzling in its grandeur, unbothered by the questions it left in its wake. Claire didn't think much of it the first time. It was a casual conversation with her mother over the phone, a quick check-in about weekend plans and whether the family would be getting together again soon. Claire, feeling the growing weight of wedding talk and eager for some peace, had suggested spending the upcoming weekend at the lake house. The weather was warming, and after a long winter in Boston, the idea of returning to Harbor's Rest with a good book and a thermos of tea sounded like the perfect escape. "I thought I'd head up to the cabin this weekend," she said. "Check in, do a little maintenance. I could use the quiet." There was a pause on the other end, a half-second too long. "Oh, honey, there's no need," her mother said quickly. "We already had someone check on the place last week. Hired a handyman local fellow. He said everything looks great." Claire blinked, a little surprised. "You hired someone?" "Yes, we just thought it'd save you the trouble. You're busy with work and all. We've been meaning to help out more with the property." Her mother's tone was overly cheerful, slightly rehearsed. Claire didn't argue, but something in her gut felt off. In all the years since inheriting the house, her parents had never once shown interest in helping with upkeep. Not during windstorms, not after a raccoon got into the roof, not even when she'd restained the entire porch by herself one summer. The sudden enthusiasm seemed out of character. Still, she let it go. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe they were trying to mend fences after the awkwardness surrounding the will. Maybe it really was just an attempt to be helpful. But Claire couldn't help feeling a faint chill under the warmth of her mother's words. A few days later, the second signal came, and it wasn't so easily brushed aside. Claire had just come home from a site visit when her phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. She let it go to voicemail. An hour later, while making tea, she finally listened. "Claire, dear, it's Dorothy Myers," the message began. "I hope I'm not overstepping, but I just wanted to say it was a shame we didn't get a chance to say goodbye. I didn't know you'd sold the lake house. It's a lovely young couple who moved in very friendly, but still, I'll miss seeing you up here in the summers." Claire's hand froze on the kettle. "Sold?" Her first thought was that Dorothy must have misunderstood. Maybe someone new had rented a place nearby, or perhaps the couple were temporary guests. Still, Claire's stomach tightened. Dorothy had lived 2 doors down from Harbor's Rest for 30 years. She was sharp, meticulous, and not the type to confuse details. Claire called her back immediately. "Oh, sweetheart, I didn't mean to upset you," Dorothy said. "I just assumed you'd moved on. The for sale sign was up for about 2 weeks, then suddenly down again. Then a moving truck came, and the couple's been there ever since. I figured it was your decision." Claire felt her mouth go dry. "Dorothy, I never put the house up for sale." There was a long silence on the other end. "Well, then I think you might want to come take a look." After hanging up, Claire tried to calm her racing thoughts. She logged into her county property tax account to check for updates. Each year, she received a mailed notice about taxes due on the lake house. It usually arrived in early spring. She hadn't received one this year, but with the wedding and work deadlines, she'd assumed it was just delayed. Now, she realized she hadn't seen the email notice either. She checked her inbox again. Nothing. Not even in spam. She called the county clerk's office. "Yes, Miss Emerson," the clerk confirmed after a brief hold. "Our records show a change of ownership processed about 6 weeks ago. New documents filed under Robert and Marianne Emerson." Claire's blood ran cold. She hung up and turned to her personal banking account just to feel grounded. But the anxiety only sharpened. A recent security alert stood out. New device login from unknown IP. Her financial advisor had sent her a follow-up email 2 days earlier, asking whether she had authorized a login from a location in Vermont. She hadn't. Quickly, she changed all her passwords, added two-step verification, and alerted her bank's fraud department. As she sat at her kitchen table, laptop open, hands shaking, the unease settled into something harder, colder. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a well-meaning handyman or a neighbor confused by a sign. This was something else. Someone had tampered with her accounts, interfered with her mail, and possibly somehow transferred ownership of the one place in the world that felt like hers. She didn't have all the answers yet, but for the first time, Claire felt the floor begin to shift beneath her, and she knew without question that someone very close to her had done the unthinkable. Claire left Boston before sunrise, her hands tight on the steering wheel and her thoughts spinning like storm clouds. The GPS marked the trip at just under 3 hours, but the drive to Harbor's Rest felt longer, this time heavier. She had driven that same winding road every summer for years, past the familiar general store, the old sign for the canoe rental shack, the faded "Welcome to Wyman Lake" banner hanging crooked on the fence post at the edge of town. But nothing felt welcoming now. When she turned onto the gravel driveway, her heart sank. The sign at the entrance, hand-carved by her grandfather decades ago, with the words "Harbor's Rest" etched into the wood, was gone. The posts were still there, but the plank had been taken down. She slowed to a stop in front of the house, and her breath caught. The shutters had been painted a different color. The porch swing was gone. The front door had a new, gleaming lock keypad entry, instead of the simple brass knob her grandfather had installed. For a moment, Claire just sat there in her car, staring at the house that looked like hers but somehow wasn't. She stepped out slowly and approached the door, unsure of what she was even going to say. Before she could knock, the door opened. A middle-aged woman with short, silvering hair and a kind smile appeared. Behind her stood a tall man in khakis and a baseball cap, waving warmly. "Hi there," the woman said. "You must be from next door. We've been meaning to introduce ourselves." Claire blinked. "Actually, I'm Claire Emerson. This was my grandfather's house." The woman tilted her head, surprised. "Oh, Jack Emerson's granddaughter? My goodness, I'm so sorry. We didn't realize." "Well, I'm Sarah Peterson. This is my husband, Mark. We bought the house from your parents a few weeks ago." Claire stared at them, her stomach lurching. "My parents?" "Yes. Robert and Elaine Emerson, correct?" Sarah said. "They handled everything, said the property was part of a family estate. We didn't know you were still around. I hope we haven't caused any upset." Mark gestured politely. "Would you like to come in? You're welcome to take a look. We haven't moved much in yet." Claire hesitated, then nodded. Inside, the house had been rearranged, nothing drastic, but enough to make her feel like an intruder in a dream version of her own memories. She glanced around at the stripped mantel, the missing photographs, the absence of Jack's old tool chest. Everything personal had been removed. "We kept the original paperwork in a binder," Sarah offered, opening a side drawer and pulling out a folder. "Everything's in there, the title transfer, closing documents, notarized forms. We like to keep things organized." Claire took the folder with shaking hands and flipped through the pages. There, staring back at her, was a signature bearing her name. It looked close, almost perfect, but she knew instantly it wasn't hers, and listed above it were the names of the sellers: Robert Emerson and Elaine Emerson, her parents. And below that, the notary seal, dated 6 weeks ago. Her voice trembled, but she steadied herself. "I never signed this. I didn't authorize this sale." The Petersons looked horrified. "Oh dear," Sarah said, pressing a hand to her chest. "We're so sorry. We bought it in good faith. We had no idea." "I believe you," Claire said quietly, "but I'm going to need to speak with my attorney." Back in her car, parked under the towering pines that once shaded her childhood summers, Claire dialed Jessica Cole. A former college classmate and now one of the sharpest real estate attorneys in Boston, Jessica was the only person Claire trusted to handle something like this. Jessica answered on the second ring. "Claire, what's wrong?" Claire inhaled slowly. "The lake house. It's been sold. By my parents. I just saw the papers. My name is forged." There was a pause, and then Jessica's voice came calm and clear. "You're absolutely sure?" "Yes, I'm holding the documents now." "Then send me high-res photos of every page. We'll start with a full document analysis, and contact the county recorder. If your signature was forged and the sellers weren't the legal owners, we can move fast. Claire, this is a criminal matter. But we can undo this. We can take it back. Claire stared at the house once more before pulling away. As she drove down the gravel path and back toward the highway, the trees seemed taller, darker, the sky more overcast. The betrayal had moved from suspicion to fact, and now it had a name and a paper trail. Her sanctuary had been stolen. But Jessica's voice echoed in her mind, steady and unwavering. We can undo this. We can take it back. Jessica worked quickly. Within 24 hours of receiving the scanned sale documents from Claire, she had already flagged multiple red flags. The notary stamp used on the deed was registered to a woman named Pamela Rourke, a licensed notary based in southern Vermont. Jessica placed a call immediately, introducing herself and explaining the situation in calm, measured tones. Pamela was shocked. I've never notarized anything for a Claire Emerson, she said firmly. I don't even practice in Massachusetts. And that stamp, if it's got my seal and signature on it, must have been forged. I lost a notary journal and my seal last December. Someone broke into my locked cabinet at a community center during an event. I filed a report with the county office. Jessica's voice sharpened. Did the report include the seal number? Yes. I have a copy of it here. Do you want the incident number? Please, Jessica said. That helps more than you know. Within the hour, Claire and Jessica were sitting together in Jessica's office, a neat but determined space above a real estate brokerage downtown. The timeline was falling into place rapidly, and the more they uncovered, the clearer it became that the sale of Harbor's Rest wasn't just immoral, it was criminal. Jessica opened her laptop and scrolled through property transfer logs available from the county's public records. Here, she said, pointing. Transfer of title filed 6 weeks ago. Seller listed as Robert and Elaine Emerson. Buyer, Mark and Sarah Peterson. Sale price, $320,000. Claire frowned. That's way too low. The last appraisal was over $500,000. Jessica nodded grimly. Exactly. That property, with its lakefront access and history, should have fetched at least $500,000 more if they'd waited a month or two for high season. But someone was in a rush. Claire exhaled, and Petersons had no idea. No, they were innocent buyers. They thought they were getting a good deal on a fast sale estate transfer. I reached out to their realtor, and she confirmed they were told the family wanted to offload the property quickly due to emotional associations. Classic cover. Claire leaned back, absorbing the scale of the deception. So my parents... Jessica raised a hand. Hold that thought. There's more. She handed Claire a printed spreadsheet from her desktop. I asked you to check your financial accounts last night. Good instincts. Here's what I found once I got access to your flagged transactions. Claire scanned the document. Most of it looked routine. Then her eyes stopped on a cluster of withdrawals, 4 in total, transferred from her savings account via an old joint account she'd once linked to help her parents after her father's knee surgery years ago. She had forgotten it even existed. $7,850 to Lux Bridal Boston. $12,400 to Diamato Jewelers. $21,000 to Lemaire Resort Group. And $9,600 to a videography service based in Providence, specializing in drone footage and cinematic wedding packages. Claire stared. Those are wedding payments. Jessica nodded. Every one of them made within 2 weeks of the house sale. All withdrawn from your funds. My funds, Claire repeated, voice hollow. They sold my house, forged my name, and used my money to fund Heather's wedding. Jessica leaned forward, her voice steady. Claire, what they did falls under multiple categories of fraud. Forgery, identity theft, real estate fraud, misappropriation of funds, and we have the paper trail to prove it. Your parents forged the sale, took a below-market offer, and used the proceeds along with your account access to pay for a luxury wedding under the pretense that it was all covered. Claire said nothing for a moment, letting the facts settle. She felt as if she were suspended between disbelief and fury. Every justification her parents had given her now reeked of manipulation. All the warm dismissals, the phony cheer, the insistence that they had a financial plan. The betrayal was bigger than she had imagined. She looked up, her voice quiet but unwavering. What do we do next? Jessica didn't hesitate. We open a civil case. We file a motion to freeze all assets associated with the sale. We contact the county clerk with the affidavit from the notary. And we file a formal criminal complaint with the district attorney's office. Claire nodded slowly. And the Petersons? They'll be protected, Jessica said. Once this is settled, they'll either be refunded or you'll buy the property back, but you'll get your house back, legally and fully. Claire closed her eyes for a long moment. When she opened them, something had changed. The disbelief was gone. In its place was clarity. It was no longer just about the lake house. It was about everything they had taken without asking, and everything she would now take back. For 2 nights after her meeting with Jessica, Claire couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, turning over every detail, every betrayal, every number on that spreadsheet. The evidence was clear. The law was on her side. And yet, something in her heart hesitated. She didn't want to destroy her sister's wedding. She didn't want to be remembered as the bitter one who showed up with court orders and accusations while flower girls scattered petals on a manicured aisle. No matter what her parents had done, no matter how deliberately they had stolen from her, Claire still clung to the idea that families should not be torn apart in public. She made herself coffee at 3 a.m. and sat at the kitchen table, reading through the first draft of the legal complaint Jessica had prepared. She could feel the tension in her chest, anger battling restraint. Part of her whispered, "You owe them nothing." But another part said, "Wait until after the wedding. Don't cause a scene." Claire had never been one for scenes. Even as a child, she had learned that her emotions weren't welcome. So she breathed through it, made no decisions, and let the document sit unsigned on her desk. The next afternoon, while walking back from a site visit, her phone buzzed. A friend from college, Megan, had tagged her in a comment on Facebook. Claire opened the app without much thought until she saw the post. It was Heather. A carefully filtered photo of the 2 of them as children at the lake house, with Heather wearing a flower crown and Claire holding her hand. The caption read, "I've always looked up to my big sister. She gave up so much for me, her time, her space, even her legacy, so I could have the wedding of my dreams. She chose to live simply, to stay in the background, and let me shine. That's what real love looks like. Thank you, Claire, for your sacrifice. I promise I'll make you proud." Claire read it twice. Then a third time. Sacrifice? She wasn't sure whether it was the falseness of the tone or the public performance of virtue that hurt more. There was no acknowledgement of the theft, no hint of remorse, just a polished lie wrapped in flowery gratitude, painting Claire not as a victim, but as some kind of quiet martyr who had gladly handed over her life's most meaningful inheritance. She scrolled through the comments. Strangers were leaving hearts and tearful emojis. Family friends praised Heather's grace and maturity. "You're so lucky to have a sister like Claire," one wrote. Another said, "She must really love you to give you so much." Claire's hands shook. It wasn't just theft anymore. It was erasure. Her silence was being used as permission, her pain twisted into a narrative that made Heather look selfless and noble. The house, the money, the betrayal, they weren't secrets Heather was ashamed of. They were now part of a carefully staged performance, a celebration of her ability to take what she wanted while appearing angelic in the process. In that moment, something inside Claire hardened. She closed the app and opened her desktop folder titled Legal. She began to organize every screenshot, every receipt, every banking document. She exported the notary's affidavit and added it to the evidence pile. She pulled up a clean document and began writing a letter to the district attorney's office, clear, concise, supported by facts. Then she opened her video editor and began stitching together a visual timeline. Photos of the house before and after the sale, copies of the forged signature, footage of her grandfather's will reading, scans of her bank account showing the stolen funds. If they wanted a story, she would give them one, but it would be the truth. By midnight, she had drafted a formal complaint to the county recorder. A cease and desist order for the real estate agent who had filed the fraudulent paperwork, and an outline for a public statement. Not for revenge. For clarity. For dignity. For justice. She would not be silenced. She would not be rewritten. Heather had turned Claire's life into a stepping stone for her social fairy tale. But Claire still held something far more powerful than any venue, dress, or drone shot video. She held the truth. And now, she was ready to use it. The Morgan estate in Newport looked like something pulled from a royal fairy tale. Guests arrived in black tie attire, their heels clicking against the imported marble pathway, leading to a white arch draped in silks from Lion. 2 valets managed the procession of luxury vehicles. Crystal chandeliers had been suspended from tall oak trees, and live classical music floated through the warm afternoon air from a Steinway grand piano placed carefully beneath a rose-covered pergola. Guests whispered about the cost, the spectacle, the splendor. It wasn't just a wedding, it was a performance of wealth and perfection. From a distance, Claire watched the whole thing unfold with a curious detachment. Her pale blue gown was understated compared to the glittering sequins and designer labels around her. She stood at the edge of the crowd, her expression calm, composed. No one could have guessed what she knew, or what she had planned. The ceremony began at precisely 5:30 p.m. A string quartet took over as Heather appeared at the top of the aisle in a custom French gown that shimmered in the light. Tyler stood at the altar looking every bit the polished heir. Claire watched her sister glide toward her future, veil trailing like mist, smile radiant and untouchable. The crowd rose in a practiced motion. Drones hovered above, capturing every second in cinematic perfection. Claire said nothing. At the reception, guests sipped champagne under the glow of hanging lanterns. The ballroom had been transformed into a garden of orchids and gold-trimmed decor. A full orchestra replaced the quartet. There were fireworks set to classical music. Waiters in white gloves moved like dancers, serving 5-course meals paired with wines flown in from Tuscany. It was extravagant to the point of satire, but no one seemed to notice. They were too caught up in the spectacle. Claire made her way through the crowd, slowly, politely nodding at acquaintances, saying little. Her parents beamed at the center table, like they were royalty themselves. Her mother wore a floor-length gown Claire recognized from a high-end boutique in Back Bay. Her father clutched a scotch and looked far too pleased with himself. When Claire approached, her father greeted her with a wide grin and outstretched arms. "There she is," he said, raising his glass. "The one who made all of this possible." Claire kept her expression measured. "Glad I could be here." Her mother chimed in, half laughing. "We were just saying what a gift you've given this family. Thank you, Claire, for your generosity." Claire nodded once. "Of course." Later that evening, when the dancing had begun and the night air was heavy with perfume and champagne, Heather took the mic. A hush fell over the guests as the bride stood beneath a cascade of white orchids, a glass of wine in hand and a glow in her cheeks. "I know I'm supposed to toast my new husband," she began with a charming laugh, "but before I do, I want to raise a glass to someone else." She turned toward Claire, locking eyes across the floor. "To my sister. Claire, you've always been quiet, selfless, strong. You've given me more than I ever deserved. You chose peace over drama. You let me have this day, this dream. You gave up something precious to you without ever asking for anything in return." Gasps of admiration murmured through the crowd. Heather's voice softened. "I know you don't like attention, but I want everyone here to know I see your sacrifice. I will never forget what you've done for me. You're the reason this day is possible." The applause swelled. Claire felt every pair of eyes turned to her with pity, admiration, and mild confusion. In their view, she was the sainted sister, the silent benefactor, the quiet woman in the corner who had bowed gracefully so another could shine. Claire stood, glass in hand. She offered a faint smile. "Well," she said, her voice clear and calm, "I'm glad you think so, Heather. And I do hope you enjoy every part of today. The music, the dress, the wine." She paused, her gaze unwavering. "And when you wake up tomorrow, make sure you check your mailbox." There was a brief, awkward silence, just a flicker of uncertainty before the orchestra resumed, and the moment passed like a cloud over the moon. Heather's smile faltered just slightly, but she recovered quickly, raising her glass again with another laugh, and the guests laughed with her. Claire sat down, her expression unchanged. She had said what she needed to. The rest was already in motion. Letters were mailed. Files had been sent. Court dates were scheduled. This day belonged to Heather. Tomorrow would belong to Claire. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the first courier rang the bell at the Emerson home. Elaine was in the kitchen finishing her coffee, Robert reading the paper at the dining table. They had only just returned from the wedding after-party the night before. The house was still humming with the afterglow of celebration flowers on every surface, champagne flutes in the sink, Heather's wedding dress carefully hung in the guest room, waiting for preservation. The last thing either of them expected was a manila envelope addressed to both of them, delivered via certified courier with a signature request. Elaine signed absently and opened the envelope with a smile still faint on her face. That smile disappeared within moments. Inside was a stack of documents. A formal complaint, a full report of property transfer fraud, a notarized affidavit from Pamela Rourke stating her seal had been stolen, a forensic handwriting report proving the forged signature, and a demand for immediate return of all proceeds from the illegal sale. Attached were screenshots of banking transactions, photos of the lake house transfer logs, and an official notice from Claire's attorney, Jessica Cole, warning of pending civil and criminal action. Robert stared at the pages, his face slowly blanching. Elaine clutched the edge of the kitchen counter. Across town, other packages were arriving. One was delivered to the Morgan family estate, handed directly to Tyler's father by a second courier. Another arrived at the office of the wedding planner, alerting them that the source of funds for the services rendered was under investigation. Even the videographer received a cease and desist regarding the use of drone footage on social media, as the property featured was now part of an ongoing legal dispute. But the most immediate reaction came just before noon. Claire's phone rang. She was sitting calmly on the deck of her apartment, sipping tea, a folder of backup evidence beside her. She saw the caller ID Heather. Claire let it ring once before answering. "Hello?" Heather's voice was high-pitched, trembling between disbelief and rage. "Are you serious right now? You sent legal documents to the house? On my honeymoon?" Claire kept her tone even. "I told you to check your mailbox. This is insane. You're destroying everything. Do you realize what this looks like? What people are going to think?" "I don't care what people think," Claire replied. "I care what's true. You could have waited. You could have talked to me privately. You didn't have to humiliate us." "I gave you a chance," Claire said, voice sharpening slightly. "Multiple chances. You didn't just take the house. You let them use my name, my money, my silence. And then you turned me into a prop for your perfect wedding." Heather was silent for a beat. Then she said, "You're ruining the family. You know that?" Claire exhaled. "No. You already did that. I'm just cleaning up." The call ended. Claire stared at her phone for a long moment before placing it face down on the table. That afternoon, an email arrived from her mother. No subject line, just one sentence. "We need to talk. Can we meet, just the three of us?" Claire replied, "I'll meet, but not alone." The next day, at a neutral law office in Cambridge, Claire arrived at 2 p.m. on the dot, wearing a simple navy suit and carrying a leather-bound folder. Her parents were already seated in the small conference room, visibly aged by the weight of what had unfolded in just 48 hours. Robert looked defensive. Elaine looked pleading. Jessica entered with Claire and sat beside her, crisp and composed. "Thank you for coming," Elaine began softly. "We understand that you're upset." Claire didn't respond. She let Jessica open the folder. "We're beyond upset," Jessica said professionally. "We're dealing with criminal misconduct, forgery, real estate fraud, unauthorized access to financial accounts. It's not about feelings anymore." Robert cleared his throat. "There must be some way to resolve this quietly. As a family," Claire finally spoke. "You had every opportunity to act like family. Instead, you acted like thieves." Elaine leaned forward. "If we agree to pay back what we took, can we settle this privately?" Claire glanced at Jessica, who handed over a second document. "This is a repayment schedule," Jessica said. "It includes restitution for the property sale, financial penalties, and legal costs. If you sign it and pay the first installment by Friday, we can pause further filings. If not, we proceed to court." Robert's jaw tightened. "You would take us to court?" Claire looked at him for a long, quiet moment. "You already did," she said. "You just didn't think I'd fight back." The Emerson family hadn't gathered under one roof since the wedding. But this time, there were no champagne glasses or flower arrangements. The Petersons had offered their home as neutral ground, and Claire agreed. It was fitting after all. They were the unintended victims too. The air inside was thick with tension, made heavier by the presence of Jessica, who sat beside Claire with her case folder neatly closed in her lap. Robert and Elaine arrived first, dressed conservatively and looking tired, anxious. Heather entered last, eyes downcast, her husband conspicuously absent. Claire stood, calm but commanding, and opened the meeting without ceremony. "I've asked you here because it's time to stop pretending. I've kept quiet long enough." She walked to the end of the table, placed a tablet on a stand, and tapped the screen. A slideshow began simple, methodical. First slide. The official deed transfer with her forged signature. Second, the bank withdrawals tied directly to wedding vendors. Third, an affidavit from Pamela Rourke, the Vermont notary, stating that her seal was stolen and her signature forged. Then came the emails, the timelines, and finally, a summary of the legal penalties pending if no agreement was reached. Elaine sat motionless, her face flushed. Robert's lips pressed into a thin line. Heather looked like she might cry. Claire let the silence settle for a moment before speaking again. "I wanted this to be private. I gave all of you chances to come clean. You didn't." Jessica added evenly, "If we go to court, this will all become public record. The forgery, the theft, the manipulation. But Claire has agreed to give you one opportunity to resolve this here." At that moment, Sarah and Mark Peterson entered the room, carrying a manila folder of their own. Elaine stiffened at the sight of them. Sarah gave a sad smile. "I didn't want to say anything until I was sure," Sarah said gently, addressing Claire. "But I think you deserve the truth, too." She turned to Elaine. "You didn't think I'd remember you, did you?" Elaine's jaw clenched. "This isn't the time." "I think it is," Sarah continued. "You and I worked together at Street Mary's when our kids were toddlers. I was in HR. You were an office manager. I remember you well. So when we saw the listing for the lake house, I was surprised but not suspicious. You said it was your property. You never mentioned your daughter was the legal heir." Claire turned toward her mother. "You knew the buyers." Elaine looked down. "They offered cash. We thought—" "You thought you could pass it off as yours," Claire said, her voice sharper now. "You counted on me not noticing. On me being too loyal, too quiet." Heather shifted in her seat. She hadn't spoken a word until now. But when Claire's eyes met hers, she looked away. "I'm sorry," Heather whispered. Claire didn't move. "You knew." "I saw one of the documents," Heather admitted, her voice brittle. "A few days before the wedding, it had your name. But Dad said you'd agreed, that it was handled. And I needed the wedding to go smoothly. I didn't ask questions." Claire let the weight of that statement hang in the air. "I needed the wedding. Not I'm sorry I let them steal from you. Not I tried to stop it. Just a confession of convenience." Jessica opened her folder and slid a printed sheet across the table. "These are Claire's terms," she said, her voice clipped but professional. 1. Full restitution of the $320,000 from the sale of the house. 2. Public acknowledgement that Claire was the rightful owner and the transaction was conducted fraudulently. 3. A written apology, to be shared with the Petersons and legal representatives. 4. The immediate closure of any financial accounts in Claire's name or linked to her estate. 5. Both Robert and Elaine must attend family mediation and psychological evaluation before any further contact with Claire is allowed. Elaine inhaled sharply. "You want us to see a therapist?" "You weaponized my love for this family," Claire said. "You used it against me. I want proof that if I ever speak to you again, it won't be as someone you can manipulate." Robert looked like he might explode, but he said nothing. His silence was permission. Heather finally looked at her sister fully, her voice cracked. "Do you hate me?" Claire paused. The room was still. "I don't hate you," she said. "But I don't trust you, and trust is harder to rebuild than a house." The courtroom was quiet when the judge delivered the ruling, his voice echoing across the paneled walls with deliberate clarity. Claire sat upright, hands clasped in her lap, listening as the words she had waited months to hear finally arrived. The court finds that the property transaction involving Harbor's Rest was executed under fraudulent circumstances. The sale is hereby voided. Legal ownership is restored to Miss Claire Emerson. There was a pause as the judge flipped a page. Furthermore, due to the good faith involvement of the Peterson family and their cooperation throughout the investigation, full restitution for their financial loss will be provided by the defendants, Robert and Elaine Emerson, as part of the negotiated civil settlement. Claire didn't smile. She simply nodded, a quiet gesture of acknowledgement. Jessica placed a hand on her arm in silent affirmation. Justice wasn't loud, it was steady, and today it had arrived. The Petersons, seated nearby, exchanged glances of quiet relief. They had never wanted a battle. They had trusted the wrong people and nearly lost everything. But now, thanks to Claire's resolve, they would walk away whole. The court ensured not only repayment of their investment, but also coverage of their legal fees and moving costs. It was the best possible outcome under the worst of betrayals. As for Robert and Elaine, they avoided prison, but not without consequence. The prosecution had agreed to drop criminal charges in exchange for full cooperation, restitution, and a signed public statement admitting wrongdoing. But what they had preserved in legal terms, they lost in every other way. Within weeks of the court decision, word spread through their town. Friends stopped calling. Church members turned cold. Their bridge club removed them from the roster. Elaine's volunteer group politely suggested she step down. Robert's old fishing buddies quietly left him out of the next weekend trip. It wasn't rage. It was silence, the kind of communal judgment that doesn't yell but isolates. They were no longer seen as generous retirees or loving parents. They were seen for what they had done. Heather's fall came more swiftly. Barely a month after the wedding, Tyler filed for annulment. The rumors came fast, but the truth moved faster. Tyler had married Heather, not for love, but to boost his image at his father's company. The wedding was a performance meant to impress investors and clients a way to appear stable, respectable. But after the lawsuit went public, and the Emerson name became synonymous with scandal, the facade shattered. Worse still, Heather's own finances unraveled. The extravagant honeymoon had been paid for on a personal loan Tyler never intended to repay. Now creditors were calling, vendors were withdrawing promised discounts, and her social circle, once filled with envy and praise, had turned to quiet whispers and avoidance. Claire heard about the split from a mutual acquaintance. Heather had moved into a small apartment on the edge of town. She rarely went out. She quit social media. At the last family gathering, she didn't show her face. And when people spoke of the wedding now, it was no longer with admiration, it was with pity and discomfort. Claire returned to Harbor's Rest in late autumn. The leaves had turned amber and crimson, and the lake sat still as glass. She unlocked the door to the home she thought she had lost forever and stepped inside. Everything smelled faintly of cedar and memory. She didn't redecorate right away. She wanted the house to speak again before she changed anything. On her first night back, she sat by the fireplace, holding a cup of tea, the flames reflecting in her eyes. She thought of her grandfather, of the summers they'd shared, of the promise he had once whispered. If the world turns its back on you, come home. She had come home, not as a victim, not as a sister in the shadows, but as the woman who reclaimed what was hers. The repairs took time not because the house was in disrepair, but because Claire wanted every nail, every coat of paint, every carefully restored detail to mean something. She kept the original floorboards where she and her grandfather had traced summer footsteps, sanding each one by hand. She revarnished the dock, straightened the old weather vane, and rebuilt the tool shed using blueprints Jack had sketched years ago on the back of a diner napkin. When she finally reattached the hand-carved wooden sign above the porch, the name gleamed under the late spring sun. Jack's Rest. The house no longer felt like a battleground. It felt like legacy, reclaimed. One afternoon, while cleaning out the attic, Claire opened an old cedar trunk filled with blankets and fishing gear. Beneath a faded quilt, she found a yellowed envelope addressed in careful script. Her breath caught as she read the name, Claire. Inside was a letter dated 2 weeks before Jack passed. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, then life has probably gotten messy. That's how life works. But remember this, the house was never just a place. It was a promise, a place to return to when the world forgets your worth. You are not what others think you are. You are who you decide to be. Don't ever let anyone else determine your value, not family, not friends, not the world. And if they try, come back here. Remember who you are, and start again. With love, Jack. Claire folded the letter slowly and held it to her chest. She sat on the floor of the attic for a long while, eyes wet but smiling. The kind of smile that rises not from joy, but from quiet, unshakable truth. Months passed. Summer returned. One day, an envelope arrived in her mailbox. Heather's handwriting. Inside was a birth announcement, simple, unadorned, and a short note in delicate, almost apologetic ink. She's here. Her name is Lila. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I hope she might. Would you be her godmother? Claire stared at the letter. She didn't respond immediately. She walked down to the dock instead, let the breeze push through her hair, watched the water move beneath the old boards. That night, she drafted a short reply. Yes. I'll be there for her. But we live in different worlds now. I'll always protect her. I won't pretend everything's forgotten. Heather never replied. But a small photo arrived weeks later, Lila, wrapped in a blue blanket, held gently in Heather's arms. Claire placed it in a frame beside Jack's letter. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but something close to peace. That evening, as the sun sank low over the lake, Claire stepped onto the dock. The air was cool, tinted with the scent of pine and old wood. She stood at the end, where the boards creaked just slightly underfoot, and placed her hand on the railing her grandfather once built. The sky was painted in gold and lavender. The water rippled softly. A loon called in the distance. Claire closed her eyes. This time, I didn't just take the house back. I took back my voice, and I'm not giving it up again. If you made it this far, thank you for staying with Claire's journey, a story not just about betrayal and justice, but about finding the courage to reclaim your voice when it's been silenced for too long. Maybe you saw a part of yourself in Claire, someone who gave, endured, stayed quiet to keep the peace. And maybe, just maybe, you felt that shift when enough finally became enough. Now we want to hear from you. Have you ever been taken advantage of by the very people who were supposed to protect you? Did you ever walk away? Or stand your ground? Tell us in the comments below. We read every story. And if Claire's journey moved you, made you angry, or made you cheer, hit the subscribe button. We have more stories like this coming. Stories of redemption, stories of quiet strength, stories that remind you you're not alone. Until next time, remember, the truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers. And when you finally listen, it changes everything.